folks, this is Rainiac, bringing you another review of the 7th series of Doctor Who. This week's episode was The Power of Three, and before we go into it, as usual, spoiler alert, this review will contain spoilers for the episode in question, so if you haven't seen it yet, please don't watch the video until you've seen it. There may also be some minor spoilers for next week's episode and the feature beyond that, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum, but you have been warned. So then, The Power of Three. Another good little episode from Series 7, although it was not without its flaws, and I will be discussing them throughout the course of this review. Our opening this time, much like last week, was shorter than usual, but again, for me anyway, shorter was sweeter. It was just a nice little montage, basically, of Amy's travels with the Doctor up to that point, although for some reason, I don't think Rory appeared in that montage much, if at all. The reason I say I don't think he did is because that montage moved at quite a pace through the various scenes, and even though I didn't have much trouble picking out the different scenes and which episodes they were from, I can appreciate that other pairs of eyes, other people watching it, might have struggled to pick out the various different scenes. Also, I'm a little bit surprised that before the episode came on, there wasn't like a health warning. I'll just clarify what I mean by that. Usually in this country, when a program comes on that contains flashing images that might bring on, say, epilepsy, or cause trouble for people with history of seizures, there's usually a warning before the episode or the program comes on saying, this program contains flashing images, or on the news, this report contains flashing images. Unless I missed that prior to the episode being shown on BBC One, we didn't get that. That's kind of surprising, because they usually give that warning to stop them being sued if anything happens. But unless I just completely missed it, it wasn't there. It may have been on BBC America when the episode was shown there, but of course I didn't watch it on BBC America, I watched it on BBC One over here in the UK. So, I don't know, maybe I just missed it and it was there. It's nothing major anyway, just a little thing I noticed. So after we got our opening sequence and the opening credits out of the way, and by the way, just a little thing to note before we continue, it may not have been immediately noticeable in Asylum of the Daleks, but they've actually changed the design of the wormhole and also, in some respects, the Doctor Who logo for each individual episode. And that's a really nice touch. For this week, I didn't notice any particular difference in the wormhole, but the logo was actually composed of, you've guessed it, entirely of black cubes. So that was a nice little touch and provided a little bit of foreshadowing. But after we got the credits out of the way, we got the welcome return of Brian Pond. And yes, I know officially his character name is Brian Williams, but no, he's Brian Pond. Okay, he will always be Brian Pond, shut up. I was a bit surprised to see Brian return quite so soon after Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. I know I said in the review for that episode that I'd be happy to see him return at any time, but I wasn't quite prepared for any time to be 2 episodes afterwards. But he had another strong episode. I think actually in some respects he had an even stronger episode than his debut in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. Yes, he still provided a little bit of comic relief. That little bit where he started up Brian's log and then Roy said, you can't call it that, and he proceeded to stubbornly call it Brian's log anyway. That was a nice touch, that was kind of funny. But he had a strong episode, and not all of his role was comical. In fact, a lot of it was serious. That scene where he pulled the Doctor to one side and said, what's happened to your previous companions, was a really well done scene, and actually even slightly emotional, especially what could be happening in the near future. But as I said, I'm going to try and not touch on that as much as possible for the sake of everybody that doesn't want to be spoiled, because that's not fair. But anyway, a really strong episode for Brian Pond. But Brian's wasn't the only return to talk about, of course, because we also got the return of Unit. And it's been quite a while since we last saw Unit on our screens. If you think about it, the last time we saw Unit, their last appearance was in the absolutely terrible Planet of the Dead, but we have to talk about it just briefly because it was their last appearance. So they've not been on our screens for at least 4 years, and that's quite a long time in Doctor Who terms. I thought that Unit were a good addition to this story. I thought they fit in quite well because their whole purpose is to investigate and, if needs be, deal with alien threats and alien invasions, and of course the cubes were an alien invasion of a different sort, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And Unit, of course, are now being led by Kate Stewart. aka Kate Lethbridge Stewart, the daughter of the Brigadier. And I instantly got behind this character. I thought Kate was a really good, really strong character. She's witty. That line about her saying, "Yes, I've got officers' training beheading." Also, Ravens of Death. That was hilarious. She's strong-willed, and she's clever. And that's exactly the kind of character that I feel the Doctor would gravitate towards, because that kind of sums up the Doctor's personality in a nutshell. Alright, there's more to it than that, but he's witty, he's strong-willed, and extremely clever. And she's kind of... It's kind of like two peas in a pod sort of a thing, but on a different level. Obviously, he's a lot more clever than she is. But a really strong character, a really good debut for her. I'm kind of hoping that she makes a return in the future, and I've got a funny feeling that she will make a return in a future episode. Probably not in the series, but they'll probably keep her around for whenever in the future. I'd certainly like to see that. However, as good as Kate Stewart was, I kind of feel that her role would have gone to the Brigadier if Nicholas Courtney had still been with us. Sadly, we lost Nicholas Courtney last year in 2011, and a lot of Kate's character I saw the Brigadier in. I know that's intentional because she's his daughter, and therefore there's meant to be an influence of the Brigadier on his daughter. But I just got that feeling that maybe if he'd been around, this would have been the return of the Brigadier as opposed to the debut of Kate Stewart. But I don't have a problem with the debut of Kate Stewart, as I said, strong character, and I hope she returns. Now, of course, the main focus for this episode was the relationship between Amy, Rory, and the Doctor, and this was a really strong episode for all three of our main trio, even Rory. And I'm not saying that as a diss on Rory, I really like the character of Rory, it's just sometimes he is kind of pushed off to the side a little bit in favour of the Doctor and Amy. But all three of them had a really strong story. The Doctor's character in particular was really, really interesting. Matt Smith, again, had a belter of an episode. When he's on it, when Matt Smith is on it, that man is really on it. And here, he was really on it. He went from goofy to serious like that. Just brilliant. I love that scene where he's so impatient just sitting around and watching the cubes, he can't do it. So he goes to pass some time, he paints a fence, he does 5 million keepy uppies, he mows the lawn, and he says, "Right, finished." How long was that? About an hour. That was terrific. The main focus of this episode, the main theme, if you will, was Amy and Rory's realisation that they've got two lives. They've got Doctor life, as they say, and real life. And they almost had to choose which one they were going to do. Which one were they going to commit to full time? Were they going to commit to real life fully, or were they going to commit to life with the Doctor? And I have to admit, I actually thought the episode was going to end with them saying, "We're going to give it up." And that would have led into next week's episode. As it happened, they did exactly the opposite. They said, "We're going to go with you." But you know what? That's fine. I like being surprised. It's a little bit of a curveball. Curveballs are good. Curveballs are not predictable. I also really, really enjoyed the scene where the Doctor and Amy are talking to each other by the River Thames, and the Doctor explains that he's so attached to Rory and Amy because they were the first people he saw as the 11th Doctor. I thought that was a really nice explanation for why he's so attached to these two individuals. And it really is setting the stage for a really potentially sad or tragic episode next week, but as I said, I don't want to go into that in too much detail because people just yell at me that I'm spoiling the future, so I'm not going to do that. Also, the scene where one of the Doctor's hearts stops working and Amy needs the defibrillator to save him, I really liked that. It really did a good job of showing that this is a two-way relationship. And as much as Amy and Rory need the Doctor also needs Amy and Rory just as much, if not perhaps more so, otherwise he's in danger of becoming like the Time Lord Victorious that we saw at the end of the Waters of Mars. Maybe a bit of an extreme example, but you kind of get where I'm going there. He needs people to be around to be the best he can be, and if there are no companions around, he might revert to his darker side, as it were. But no, I really like that scene. On the subject of the cubes, they were probably the best villains, of obviously they're not villains, they were just tools, or the best monsters in the episode. I didn't get at first why that one cube tried to shoot the Doctor when he was at Amy's house and playing Wii Tennis. And by the way, that's another highlight of the episode, the Doctor playing Wii Tennis. Now I've seen it all. I didn't get at first why that one cube tried to shoot the Doctor, but then when I watched the episode again, it suddenly dawned on me that it actually makes perfect sense. The initial role of the cubes was to scan the whole planet, and that one cube probably identified the Doctor as an obstacle to that objective and therefore tried to remove him out of its way by shooting him. There was a lot of humour in the episode, the Wii Tennis thing notwithstanding, and I liked that. It broke up the serious parts of the episode very well, and believe me, there were some very serious parts of this episode. Some of the humour was downright hilarious. I've mentioned the Wii Tennis thing, but perhaps my funniest moment of the episode was the one cube in the unit base that constantly played the chicken dance. People who have heard this particular piece of music will know just how terrible it is, especially when it's played on a loop, so that scene was really, really funny. I also love the subtle nod to the Zygons, but I'm beginning to think that we'll never actually get to see the Zygons in the flesh in new Doctor Who. We'll just hear them mentioned every now and again, and that's kind of a shame, because while I'm not a fan of them doing solely old aliens, bringing them back, I do feel that in a story where old monsters would fit, it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring them back and give them a reimagining. We've had a new, or should I say, sorry, an old monster returning every series. Series 1 Daleks, Series 2 Cybermen, Series 3, alright, the Master, although he doesn't quite count because he's not a species, he's just one villain, but I suppose in this context he does count. Series 4, of course, the Sontarans, Series 5, the Silurians, and Series 6, it didn't actually happen, which was kind of disappointing, but no matter. I do feel the Zygons do have a place in New Who, but I'm beginning to think that perhaps the writing team don't share that point of view. So if we don't get the Zygons back in the flesh, okay, disappointing, but nothing much you can do about it. On that subject, just on a little tangent, I'd also like to see the Dravins back, but they'd have to be heavily redesigned, or they'd just come off as female equivalents of the Sontarans. But that's another monster that I feel they could really do some interesting stories with. But that's another story for another time. So far, I've only talked about the good of the episode. Now I'm afraid it's time to talk a little bit about the bad parts of the episode, because believe me, as I said at the beginning, there were some flaws. And one of the major flaws was that there was quite a bit of the plot that was unexplained, and also a fair few plot holes, one of which was a major plot hole. What exactly was the role of those two orderly guys? Obviously they weren't really orderlies. I get that they were kidnapping people from the hospital and taking them to the Shakri spaceship, wherever it was, but the reason they did this, I don't think that was ever mentioned on screen. We didn't even find out exactly what the orderlies were. They reminded me a little bit of the flesh, especially with their deformed mouths that were covered by the masks, but they clearly weren't the flesh. Also, the little girl that actually was an alkaline droid, I think that was the name for it, an alkaline droid, it was mentioned very quickly in that scene in the hospital when the Doctor shuts her down, but he said it so fast I didn't quite catch the name, so I'll just call her the alkaline droid. She was sitting in that hospital for months on end. Surely somebody who worked there would have noticed that the same little girl was sitting in the same spot for months at a time. Also, her role in the story was apparently to monitor everything on the planet, and the Doctor shut her down, but again, was it actually explained why shutting her down allowed him to find the portal to the Shakri spaceship? As I said, I don't think any of this was explained, and this is one thing that hurt the episode, that there wasn't enough explanation. The other bad part of the episode, I'm afraid, was the resolution to the plot. First things first, as soon as they said that the cubes had killed a third of the population, it was so obvious that those deaths would somehow be reversed by the end. We saw this happen again in a previous story, this time in the Last of the Time Lords, when the Masters Toclophane removed 1/10 of the population, and then by the end of the story it was clap your hands if you believe in Time Lords, and time was reversed and all the deaths actually occurred. Also, talking of nods to previous stories, The scene that I already mentioned where the Doctor's heart stops working, we saw that in the Shakespeare Code, but there, that was just to put the Doctor in some mild peril. Here, and also to advance his bond with him and Martha, I suppose. But in this story, I think it was better news because it advanced the plot and also showed his reliance or his need for Amy, as I've already said. Stephen Burkoff played our main villain, who was the interface of the Shekri spaceship. But I thought Stephen Burkoff, brilliant actor, I thought he was completely wasted in this episode. Don't get me wrong, his performance was really good and he was extremely creepy, but he wasn't on screen for that long. And I'll be honest, I didn't even realise it was Stephen Burkoff who was playing him until the end credits rolled and it said, Shekri, Stephen Burkoff, and it shocked the hell out of me because I know Stephen Burkoff. I've seen quite a few films and programmes with him in. He's one of my favourite actors, in fact. And the fact that I didn't recognise him, it just shocked me. I had the feeling we might see the Shekri again in the future, given who they are, and they might even link him to the 11th Doctor's final story, but that's just speculation on my part. The other good bit of the resolution was the Doctor's speech to the Shekri interface, as I'm going to call him. It was very similar to the speech he gave to the Atraxi at the end of 11th Hour. Again, another nod to a previous story, whether intentional or not. In some ways, in fact, the Atraxi and the Shekri are pretty much the same. They're both alien races who observed the humans and plan to destroy them, albeit for entirely different reasons. The Atraxi had a quote-unquote good motive, because they were trying to get rid of Prisoner Zero, but they were doing it by threatening to incinerate planet Earth, which is not good, whereas the Shekri are the pest controllers of the universe and see humans as vermin. But as I said, disappointing resolution, because basically the Doctor uses a sonic screwdriver and everything evil goes away. Not to mention that the way the cubes restarted everyone's hearts after they'd stopped didn't really make sense. As I said, I understand that they had to reset the status quo because you couldn't have a third of the population dying and have it permanent, but it didn't really make sense because human hearts don't work that way. I realise I'm in danger of applying logic to sci-fi, but there you go. Also, why on earth did the ship explode? I think this was just to provide a cool visual. The explanation for the ship exploding was that the cubes would create a surge of energy that would blow the ship apart. Okay, I get that, but the cubes were not on board, so why would the surge of energy hit the ship? Unless it went back through the portal, I guess. Also, there was a second wave of cubes that the interface was planning to release that the Doctor subsequently stopped. So I suppose I'll give them that little plot hole. All that, and the two orderly guys, we never saw them again. Their purpose was never explained. They were clearly minions of the Atraxi, the Shekri, and I assume they were blown up with the ship, but we never saw what happened to them, so this conclusion was a little bit of a letdown. Also, just another slight problem with the ending. I know there's a lot, or the resolution, I should say, not the ending. The ending was very good. I'm pretty sure the people that were abducted, that weren't Rory and Brian, never got taken off the ship before it went boom. And so they presumably died, and the Doctor didn't save them. Kind of strange in an episode like this where everybody's meant to live. I mean, it's not like the people were hard to spot. They were right in the middle of the room when Amy, Rory, and the Doctor came in. So surely, while the Doctor's talking to the Shekri guy, Amy and Rory could have saved them. Except maybe... I'll submit on this one that maybe they did and it was just off camera, we didn't see it. But in my point of view, if something isn't explained or seen on camera, it didn't happen, so those people, in my view, got killed. All in all, it was a disappointing resolution to quite a good story. While the resolution might have been a bit weak, however, the final couple of minutes were really, really good. Brian again came into his own here, and that little pose almost as Amy goes, the power of 3 was excellent. Also, the working title of this episode, for those that didn't know, was actually supposed to be Cubed. So it was nice to see that get a little mention at the end there, and suddenly the title, The Power of 3, makes even more sense. Not only is it the power of the 3 characters, but also Power of 3 is a cube, and what was the main threat of the episode? It was the cubes. So we came full circle, and that was really good. Overall then, a really good episode. And I have to admit, the first time I watched it, I wasn't that keen on it. I thought it was good, but a lot of people were saying that's the best story in the series, or that's the best story Chris Chibnall's ever done. Yes, it probably is the best story Chris Chibnall's ever done, although it doesn't have much competition in that department, as we discussed back when we were reviewing Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. There are some major plot holes which I've pointed out that prevent the story or the plot being that good, but the little moments like the little nod to the Zygons and the Doctor playing Wii tennis, all the humour and the relationship between the Doctor, Amy and Rory, they really made up for that and really pulled the episode up, in my estimation. As I said, first time I saw it, wasn't so keen, watched it again for the purpose of this review and really changed my tune on it. Also had a strong debut for Kate Stewart, and the little salute that the Doctor did towards the end, or right at the end, was a nice tribute to the Brigadier. As I said, Nicholas Courtney, it's a shame he was taken, we miss him a lot. Next week's episode, of course, is the final episode in this short 5-story run, and judging from the trailer alone, it looks absolutely immense. The trailer gives off a really creepy and atmospheric vibe, and again, much like A Town Called Mercy, I'm getting kind of a movie vibe to it, and that's a good thing. It's great to see the Weeping Angels back again because they're a really effective villain, and so far they haven't really appeared in an episode that was bad. Blink was probably the best story, bar none, of the Russell T Davies era, although I'm sure there'll be some people that would argue that because, you know, people have opinions. Everyone has their own opinion, and that's fine. One thing that might annoy people is that River Song is back, because we all know how people dislike River Song, and some of it is warranted. But the major reason to watch this episode, and I'm trying not to spoil too much here for those that don't want to be spoiled or want to be a surprise, and I respect that, but without going into too much detail, this is going to be a hugely impactful episode for the future. The people who know what I'm talking about, they'll understand what I mean by that. The people that don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. I would prefer you to be oblivious so it comes as more of a surprise to you when you watch the episode next week. So that just about does it for the Power of 3 review. Join me next week for what is sure to be an extremely interesting review of The Angels Take Manhattan. Until then, TTFN.